fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
What's good in your life? Hey everybody, Joe Simons, like diamonds, back again, Salt Strong, Unchurched. And let me tell you something here. I'll share you something kind of personal. I'm going through a phase right now, both as a leader and as a person, where I feel like I'm getting stretched and honestly a little bit frightened, and I think more frightened of the unknown. And here's what I mean. Salt Strong, and I'm the CEO of Salt Strong, has grown exponentially over the last couple of years. We went from, having a handful of employees, which I've done before, to all of a sudden now having 20 and looking at getting, number 21 and having to make some pretty big decisions about the future as we continue to grow. And I'll be honest, it's a little bit scary just because it's the unknown. It's the same kind of feelings I felt when I got married, right? Never been married before. What does this mean? How does this change things? Same kind of feelings the first time I became a dad, right? I mean, that's looking back now. It doesn't seem that bad, but it was, right? It was deathly frightening, and all these big questions and unknowns. And so now I'm to this point. We've grown this company, and we're now to a phase in terms of revenue and people and just me being a leader that I've never done before. And just being completely transparent and vulnerable here, a little bit scared, and sometimes waking up super excited, but also a little anxious because I don't know what the heck I'm doing. It's just trying to figure it out, one step at a time. But then again, I have to remind myself, every leader, regardless if it's a leader of a family or a leader of a multi-billion-dollar company, was never just born into that role. They had to figure it out. They had to probably make some missteps and get some help. And here's where I'm going with all this. I've chatted with quite a few of my CEO buddies who have grown really big companies, and I was just kind of telling them the predicament. I was like, man, I sometimes I don't even know who to turn to. Like, no one on my team has grown past this level either. Like, what do I do? And this theme kept coming up, was a coach, to get coaching. And shame on me, I didn't even think about that, right? And I think so many of us, and there's a couple of different messages here in this podcast. Coaching is just one kind of underlying theme. There's a really big theme here in a second. And I'm going to also share with you something that honestly is mind-blowing, that the coach that I did hire has taught me just in the first lesson that I did with him. Literally life-changing, crazy. Which will be a whole nother podcast, but I digress. So going back is the coaching, and it makes sense, right? Every athlete, anyone who's wanting to excel or be the best at anything has a coach. And sometimes we don't see that. Sometimes you don't hear about it, but it is the truth. And the more I've been reading about it and thinking about it, it is 100% true. And so I'm talking to my buddy Kyle. I mentioned him before on a podcast. He is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and I was chatting with him about it, and he recommended this one guy named Matt Mockery. And he's like, Matt Mockery is basically the coach, for a lot of these big tech companies. He is known as like the guy. And turns out I can't afford I can't afford Matt. He is like truly next level. But I ended up buying his book, which is the next best thing. And this, once again, this is not the person I got as my coach. I will share that in a second, kind of the life-changing thing that he shared with me. But I'm reading Matt's book, and it's called The Great CEO Within. And unless you're a CEO or wanting to be one, I wouldn't recommend the book. For me, it's been amazing. So it's called The Great CEO Within, but it was interesting. He's got it broken out in chapters like all books, and it's kind of in order of importance per se, in things that are really, really critical when you are growing and are trying to be a good leader. And there's like 100 and let me look here. I got it in front of me. I don't know, there's 100 something different chapters. And so in chapter 8, it's actually gratitude and appreciation. And I'm going to read this to you because this is fascinating. And in any situation, we can ask ourselves, what is wrong here, or what is right here? Okay. So in any situation, this is pretty important here. We can ask ourselves, and we tend to ask ourselves, right? This is looking at a glass half empty, half full. What is wrong here, or what is right here? From an early age, we have been taught by our parents, our teachers, and our employers to ask the formal question, right? That what is wrong here? And they cannot be faulted. They had the best intentions. In the earliest years of our lives, they were trying to keep us alive, right? The whole what is wrong here, making sure that we're not going to get killed or eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. I mean, since the beginning of ages, our bodies and our minds have kind of automatically, instinctually asked that question, what is wrong here versus what is right here? And unfortunately, and those are my notes, not his. I'm going back to the book now. And unfortunately, as unintended consequence of this is that we learn to focus on the negative so that we continually end up seeing the negative. And this leads to objectively very successful people not being fully satisfied with their lives, themselves, and so on. I'm going to read that. This leads to objectively very successful people, really all people, being not fully satisfied with their lives, themselves, and so on. And if that is where it ended, I wouldn't touch it, as this book is about becoming a great CEO, not about maximizing a feeling of fulfillment. However, that is not where it ends. It turns out that we perform our best when we're having fun and feeling good about ourselves. And if you want proof of this, go to any kids' sporting event where you know the names of the kids. Start cheering positively for the team that is losing, with specific compliments to specific kids, such as, great pass, Jimmy. Way to be in the right position, George. When a kid makes a shot and misses, good idea, Joey. It was definitely the right thing to do. Keep it up. And you'll see within 5 to 10 minutes, the tide of the game will start to change toward the team that you were giving specific compliments to. He says, I have done this many times and it has worked 100% of the time. Isn't that crazy? So he's talking about going to a sporting event with kids, or adults for that matter, but kids in particular, just to really see this happen. And when there's a team that is losing, it's got to be the team that is losing, start giving very specific compliments to specific kids, even when they're losing. And he says every single time he's done that, within 5 to 10 minutes, the tide of the game starts to change and that losing team starts coming back. That's wild. I mean, talk about the power of positivity versus, a lot of people, if you've been to sporting events, I'm starting to see it at ours. I mean, you get some of these parents who are just screaming at their kids, that was a dumb pass. Why are you doing that? And obviously, these kids get down upon themselves. Whereas on the other hand, you're giving positive reinforcement. And I mean, it's amazing, right? I mean, it's almost unexplainable. And if you're not a parent, and I'm going back to the book, if you're not a parent or don't have access to kids' sports, you can try the same technique at adult sports games that you or someone you know participates in. It works just as well, actually often better, with adults. So how do we take advantage of this knowledge to generate a good feeling in ourselves? We ask the right question. What is good about this situation? What is good about this team member? What is good about my spouse? What is good about this company? What is good about my life? Or we simply fill in the overarching statement, I am grateful for blank, and be as specific as possible. The names of actual people, actions they did, something that you're truly, truly happy for and grateful for. And the rest of this just talks about, guess what? A daily little gratitude journal. And this is the guy who, I mean, big companies are giving tons of, I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for a year just to get coached by this guy. And in many cases, even give him a part of the company. And he's going back to the basic stuff like this. And it's for a reason. I think so many of us want that special, tactic, right, or shortcut to improve our lives and get more happiness and, make more money, whatever it is. And in reality, it's going back to the basics, just being grateful. And I mean, even the sports team, right? Kids or adults, right? If we look at life is just a big game in a sport. Man, why not be positive about it? Why not look at the best and look for the best, not just the worst case scenario and all the negatives? I've talked about this so many different podcasts, and it's because it's so critical. Now, let me fast forward here just this past week to my own personal coach. And I'm going to continue to share more and more of this. I'm still honestly trying to decipher what the heck just happened. And here's what I mean. So once again, I kind of went back to my CEO buddies after I realized that I could not afford this guy, Matt Mockery. It started asking some of my other CEO buddies, people that they had been coached by and things that made a big impact with them. And this one name, I'm not going to share it with you yet. I want to make sure I get his permission to talk about him and even some of the stuff that he's sharing with me. But his name came up a couple different times, and from one guy in particular that I really, really respect a lot and admire, and trying to emulate a little bit, myself. And so I contact, this gentleman, the coach, and he wants to learn a little bit about me and our company just to make sure we're both a fit, and we were. And so I get on my first coaching call. It's an hour-long call, and kind of like I mentioned earlier, I'll be honest, I'm going in there expecting, all right, we got an hour with this guy. He's going to start giving me some tactics about, who to hire next and how to structure the company and maybe some ideas on bringing customers in. And there was none of that. I'm talking not even like touched it, any of those subjects. Instead, we started focusing on fear. And at first I was like, why does he keep talking about fears and trying to dig down, the fears? And the more I got into this conversation, the more I started realizing, I was like, wow, so much of what holds us back in life is fear. It's talked about hundreds of times, literally, in the Bible. And I've talked about it so many times in the past with, my anxiety, which is really just, it's all fear, right? So much of our lives is influenced and held back, and even our identity is challenged because of fear. And for some of us, it's the fear of not belonging, right? That, if this happens, or if I lose this, right? Or if Salt Strong goes under, right? Or if something bad happens, that all of a sudden it's this fear of not belonging. Some it's the, the fear of failure. Some it's the fear of not being needed, right? There's many of us who go through life and it's like, oh man, I have to do this and I have to be all things to all these people, because if not, I'm not needed. And then what does that mean? And here's what was interesting, and part of really the majority of the time we spent was he was asking, who are you? And, I'm throwing out things like, oh, I'm the CEO of Salt Strong and dad, father, and, son of God, and all these things. And he would just keep kind of knocking each one off, like saying, well, all right, you're a dad, but what if all of a sudden you lost all your kids tomorrow? Are you still a dad? I was like, well, I guess not. An ex-dad, perhaps. He's like, so that's not really your identity, is it? And I'm like, well, I guess not. And same with the husband, right? Yeah, I could say I'm a loving husband, but all right, let's say your wife is just whatever, not around tomorrow. Take her out of the equation. Does that mean you're a good or bad person if you're not a husband anymore? And you kind of keep eliminating all of these things that we think we are, right? And if you're whatever, CEO of a company or CEO of the house, or VP, or maybe you're just got your first job. Maybe you're just a student, right? All right, what if you get kicked out of school tomorrow? Does that really mean you're a bad person or mess with your identity? And so it keeps going back to really your identity and who you are as a person. Like I said, this is kind of trippy, and I'm not going to go into all this stuff. It'll be its own podcast when I really kind of get all my notes out and decipher all of it. But I don't know, it just got me thinking in so many different ways. And ultimately, what he's trying to uncover and what I need to uncover with all this before we can start going in all the tactics, right, is starting with the right foundation, starting with the foundation of gratitude and getting past all the fears. We all have some fear. And he even said, he's like, I've worked with, people who are billionaires, and they have fears. Some of the fears just losing, right, is going back to square one. For some of us, we don't have anything to lose, right? And so we get more aggressive. We're not working and living out of fear, except just the fear of being homeless. But for a lot of billionaires, they have a different fear, and it's the fear, once again, of maybe not belonging, or the fear of a failure of how they're going to look in other people's eyes if all of a sudden they do lose everything. That kind of that fear of belonging. Some is just the fear of of being loved, and there's many people who have been hurt by a spouse or a loved one, and just can't get close to people, and it's that fear of tight relationships. I mean, it's just really wild that everyone has some kind of underlying fear. So a couple lessons I shared here with you. One is the power of getting a coach and being around other people or a person that can help you. Number two is looking inward, like closely, like asking those tough questions. Who am I? Right? Who am I? And what is my identity? Is my identity tied too much to something? And here's what I mean. This is why a lot of people end up becoming depressed. Because if their identity, let's just say my identity was 100% tied to Salt Strong. So if Salt Strong dies, I basically die. That's quick way to lead to depression if something ever happened, or even if I sold it, right? A lot of people, their whole identity is their job or their kids or their spouse, and all of a sudden one of those goes away or even moves away, right? There's many of moms who have done this, and dads, but I think this part primarily is towards a lot of the moms who their identity is so ingrained in their kids, and all of a sudden their kids go away, and or worst case scenario, one of them passes away and they become a hot mess to the point of just flat out depression and can't be around people or even commit suicide. I mean, there's all these sad stories, and it all goes back to identity. And that doesn't mean you're not going to have sorrow and you're not going to have some suffering if your kid passes away, or whatever it is that you're so attached with, dies or passes away, from a company to a spouse or kids. But it should not be your entire identity on this earth. And it just really got me thinking. It's really, really, really kind of trippy and powerful when you start peeling back all that stuff. And that's why people feel like a failure, right? If my identity is tied to my job and I fail, yeah, I could all of a sudden see myself as a failure. And it's a slippery slope down versus always going back to my identity, saying, yeah, you know what? I did fail. Who cares? That's not who I am, right? I am not this job. I am not this, right? I don't know. I hope this is powerful. It like I said, it's a completely different shift on the mindset. But the final piece of this always goes back to that gratitude and looking at things with the glass half full. Try that little trip at the kids' game. Start learning the names of kids in your own kids' sporting events, or if you're a grandparent, or if you're one of the players. Start trying this out. I mean, if you're a high school player, and I know we got a lot of youngsters, if you will, high school kids that listen to this as well with their parents, and try it with your next game. If you guys are down, start literally every single play, start saying something positive to a specific person and watch what happens. It only takes 5-10 minutes. It's really, really wild. So I hope this was helpful. Hope this was powerful. And I will definitely be sharing more on this coaching. Like I said, a complete mind shift for me. It's only been the first one. I got another one coming up here this week, and it really, really is wild. And how ironic, right? That you hire a coach and they don't even, is a CEO, and they don't even mention anything about CEO. It all boils down to you internally and how you're viewing yourself and what your true fears are. And once you can overcome those, not 100%, there's always going to be some fears. There's always that fear that even helps drive you. But once you can identify it, right, and take it away, kind of decouple it from your own identity of who you are, that's when you really start to grow, and that's when the magic happens. And that is this goal for me, is like, we're going to spend basically 4 to 5 weeks just on this, literally just talking about fears and identity before we ever start building up to you becoming an amazing CEO and hiring and all the other kind of tactics that go with it. Otherwise, we're just giving you tactics to something that might be broken foundationally and more just fear-based. So hope that helps. Like I said, many more of these to come. And if you have any any kind of feedback or questions or ideas, things that maybe that you've learned in this phase of life or growing as a person and this whole identity thing, I'd love to hear from you. Joe at saltstrong.com. That's JOE at saltstrong.com. And also too, with these Unchurched, I'm not selling anything, as you know. We're not a real church. I'm not asking for money or tithes. All I ask, though, is that you do share this with someone who might need to hear it. And then please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and give a review. Those reviews help big time. It gets this podcast, these messages, found in many more people's little podcast search. It's honestly the quickest way for this podcast to get found and impact more people is those 5-star reviews. So please do leave a review, especially on Apple. And I appreciate you guys big time. I will talk to you on the next episode.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.